Welcome to my channel. Let me ask you something. Can one person really change the world? What if I told you that one man spent 27 years in prison and came out to lead a nation to freedom? That man was Nelson Mandela. His story is not just about politics. It's about courage, hope, and never giving up. So stay with me till the end, and I promise you will be inspired. Now let's begin this powerful journey. Chapter 1. A Boy from the Village of Mvezo. Our story begins in a small village in South Africa called Mvezo. It was here, in the year 1918, that a baby boy named Rolihlahla Mandela was born. His name in the Xhosa language means pulling the branch of a tree, or simply, troublemaker. But little did anyone know at the time, this boy would grow up to change the world. Rolihlahla came from a royal bloodline of the Thembu tribe. His father was a respected local chief, and from a young age, Mandela learned about leadership, tradition, and the importance of respect in his community. But life was not easy. When Mandela was just 9 years old, his father passed away. This event changed everything. After his father's death, Mandela was sent to live with the acting chief of the Thembu people, Chief Jongintaba Dalindyebo, in a place called Kunu. It was here that Mandela was introduced to a different kind of life, one filled with formal education, discipline, and greater expectations. He lived in a royal household, wore better clothes, and had access to schools that many African children could only dream of at the time. At school, something else happened that would stay with him forever. On his first day, his teacher gave him a new name, Nelson. In those days, it was common for African children to be given English names by their teachers, especially in missionary schools. Nobody asked him if he liked it or wanted it. It was simply given, and that was that. This small moment says a lot about the world Mandela was growing up in. A world where African identity was often pushed aside in favor of European traditions. Even as a child, Mandela started to notice things that didn't seem fair. He saw how white South Africans had better schools, better jobs, and more rights, while black South Africans were treated as second-class citizens. He didn't have the words for it yet, but something inside him knew this wasn't right. As he continued his education, he began to read more, think more, and question more. Mandela went on to attend Clarkbury Boarding Institute and later Healdtown, a respected Methodist school. From there, he entered Fort Hare University, one of the few universities available to black students at the time. It was at Fort Hare that Mandela first began to speak out. When he disagreed with how the university was being run, he joined a student protest. As a result, he was expelled. This was one of his first acts of standing up for what he believed in. Even at a young age, Mandela was not afraid to challenge authority when he believed something was unfair. Looking back, these early experiences shaped the man he would become. The boy from Mvezo, who lost his father, who received an English name not of his choosing, and who saw injustice all around him, was slowly growing into a leader. He didn't know it yet, but every moment, every lesson, and every struggle was preparing him for something greater. And this is just the beginning. In the next chapter, we will follow Mandela as he moves to the big city, discovers a new world, and begins his journey as a young activist. Don't go anywhere. His story is just starting to unfold. Chapter 2. Waking Up to Injustice. The student becomes an activist. After leaving Fort Hare University, still determined and full of ambition, Mandela made a bold decision. He moved to Johannesburg, the largest city in South Africa. The city was busy, full of energy, and filled with both opportunity and extreme inequality. It was in Johannesburg that Mandela would open his eyes to the deep injustice faced by Black South Africans every single day. He arrived with almost nothing, but his heart was full of purpose. He took small jobs at first and later became a law clerk while continuing to study law by correspondence. This was the start of a long and difficult journey, not just to become a lawyer, but to become a voice for the people who had no voice. In Johannesburg, Mandela met two men who would become life-changing friends and mentors: Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu. These were not just ordinary men. They were thinkers, leaders, and believers in a free South Africa. Sisulu introduced Mandela to a growing political group called the African National Congress, or ANC. The ANC was formed to fight for the rights of Black South Africans. Mandela listened, learned, and then joined. This was the beginning of his life as an activist. During this time, apartheid laws were growing stronger. Apartheid was a system created by the white-led government to separate people by race. It controlled where you could live, where you could go to school, what job you could have, and even who you could marry. Everything was divided: black and white, rich and poor, power and silence. It was unfair, cruel, and painful. And Mandela decided that he could not stay silent any longer. He joined the African National Congress Youth League, which believed in peaceful protest, education, and organizing people to demand their rights. Mandela helped organize boycotts, strikes, and marches. He went from being a quiet student to a rising leader. He spoke to crowds, wrote speeches, and inspired others to believe in freedom. One of the biggest spikes in his early life came when Mandela helped lead the Defiance campaign in 1952. This was a peaceful protest where thousands of Black South Africans broke apartheid laws on purpose. They entered whites-only areas, refused to carry identity passes, and were arrested willingly. Mandela himself traveled around the country encouraging people to join the movement. It was dangerous work. The government was watching him closely. Every speech, every meeting, every protest made him more of a target. Mandela knew the risks. He knew that one wrong move could put him in prison or worse. But he kept going, because by now he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for millions of people who wanted to live in dignity. During this time, Mandela also became one of the first Black lawyers in South Africa. Together with Oliver Tambo, he opened a law firm in Johannesburg that served poor Black clients, people who had no other legal help. For the first time, these people had someone to fight for them in court. Mandela believed that the law should be a tool for justice, not a weapon for control. But as the government grew more aggressive, so did the challenges. Police started breaking up protests with violence. Laws were passed to silence voices like Mandela's. Friends were arrested. Some disappeared. The fight for justice was no longer just about words. It became a matter of great personal risk. Still, Mandela did not stop. With every act of resistance, his name grew stronger. He was no longer just a law student or a young activist. He was becoming a symbol. a person who stood for something bigger than himself. This chapter of Mandela's life shows us a man who could have lived a quiet, successful life, but chose instead to fight for what was right. He believed that even though the system was powerful, the power of people united for justice was stronger. And yet, this was only the beginning. In the next chapter, Mandela's peaceful struggle takes a new turn. As the government cracks down harder, Mandela is forced to make a difficult choice: stay silent or fight back in a new way. What happens next will change everything. Chapter 3. From Peace to Resistance: The Road to Prison. As the 1950s turned into the 1960s, South Africa was changing, but not for the better. The apartheid government was becoming more violent, more controlling, and more determined to crush any voice that demanded freedom. Peaceful protests were met with brutal police force. Marches were broken up with guns and tear gas. Many of Mandela's friends were arrested. Some were killed. The dream of peaceful change was fading, and Nelson Mandela faced a very difficult question. How do you fight a system that uses violence to silence peace? Mandela, who had always believed in nonviolent resistance, came to a painful conclusion. The time for peaceful protest had passed. If the government would not listen to peaceful voices, maybe it would listen to something louder. In 1961, he helped form a new group called Umkhonto we Sizwe, meaning Spear of the Nation. This group was the armed wing of the ANC, but it was not about killing or terror. Mandela was clear. Their goal was sabotage, to damage government buildings and systems, not people. The aim was to shake the foundations of apartheid and get the world's attention, while avoiding the loss of life. This was a major turning point. Mandela went underground, changing locations often, wearing disguises, and secretly meeting with leaders across the country. The press began calling him the Black Pimpernel, a nickname taken from a fictional character who was always one step ahead of the law. Mandela was becoming a mystery, a symbol, and a serious threat in the eyes of the government. But freedom always comes at a cost. In 1962, Mandela was captured. He had been traveling outside the country to meet leaders and raise support for the struggle. When he returned, police arrested him. At first, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for leaving the country without permission and for organizing protests. But that was just the beginning. While Mandela was serving this sentence, police raided a farm in Rivonia near Johannesburg. There, they found documents, plans, and secret records from Umkhonto we Sizwe. These documents linked Mandela and other leaders to the group's sabotage campaign. A new trial began. The Rivonia trial, one of the most famous trials in South African history. This is where the story reaches a powerful spike. Mandela stood in court, not afraid, not silent, but strong. He admitted that he was part of Umkhonto we Sizwe and explained why. In his now legendary speech, Mandela said, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Those words shook the courtroom. The judge could have sentenced him to death. But instead, Mandela and 7 others were given life sentences. It was 1964. He was 46 years old. Just think about that for a moment. A man who had fought for peace, then chose resistance without violence, stood up in court and said he was willing to die, not for revenge, not for power, but for freedom for all people. It was a moment of pure courage. Mandela was sent to Robben Island, a small, harsh prison off the coast of Cape Town. He would stay there for many, many years, cut off from the world, separated from his family, and forgotten by many in South Africa. But outside the prison walls, something had started to grow. His words, his bravery, and his sacrifice were waking up people all around the world. This chapter of Mandela's life is full of danger, secrecy, and powerful choices. It shows us a man who walked away from comfort, stepped into risk, and faced prison with dignity. He could have taken an easier path, but he chose to stand up, even when it meant losing his freedom. But the story does not end here. In the next chapter, we follow Mandela into prison, into a place meant to break him. But instead of breaking, he becomes even stronger. What happens behind those prison walls will surprise you and inspire you. Chapter 4: 27 Years Behind Bars. The Heart of a Leader. For most people, a prison sentence of life means the end. It means silence, loneliness, and fading into darkness. But for Nelson Mandela, prison became something very different. It became a place of learning, growth, and quiet strength. In 1964, when Mandela was sent to Robben Island, many believed it was the last the world would hear of him. But instead, behind thick prison walls and cold steel bars, a leader was being shaped, not destroyed. Robben Island was a hard, cruel place. Mandela and other political prisoners were forced to do manual labor every day, working long hours in a limestone quarry under the hot sun. Their hands bled. Their food was basic: maize, bread, weak soup. The prison guards treated them harshly, and Mandela was allowed to see his wife and children only a few times a year, if at all. He was often kept in solitary confinement, in a small cell with just a mat on the floor and a bucket. It was a life meant to break a man's spirit. But Mandela refused to be broken. He turned his cell into a classroom. He studied law and politics, he read books, and he encouraged other prisoners to learn too. Over time, they began calling Robben Island the University because of how much learning and sharing was happening, even in silence. Mandela taught lessons on leadership, patience, and forgiveness. He believed that knowledge was power, even if he was behind bars. One of the most powerful things about Mandela was his ability to lead, even without speaking to the outside world. Word of his dignity and strength began to spread beyond the prison. Letters were smuggled out. Former prisoners shared stories. People began to ask, "Who is this man who will not give up?" Slowly, Nelson Mandela's name started to grow again. This time, not just in South Africa, but around the globe. In the 1970s and 80s, the world changed. More countries began to understand what apartheid really meant. They saw the injustice, the racism, and the pain of the system in South Africa. People started marching in cities around the world: London, New York, Paris, Nairobi, chanting "Free Nelson Mandela." Musicians wrote songs, students held protests, and governments put pressure on the South African regime. Even though Mandela hadn't been seen in public for years, he had become a symbol of freedom, justice, and human dignity. Inside the prison, Mandela heard the news. He learned that millions of people were saying his name, wearing shirts with his face, and calling for his release. But he remained humble. He didn't want to be a hero. He wanted his people to be free. And still, even as time passed, he showed no bitterness, no revenge, no anger. He believed that true freedom also meant freeing your heart from hate. The spike moment in this chapter is emotional and powerful. It comes when world leaders, like US President Ronald Reagan, UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and many others, begin to feel the pressure from their own people to act. The United Nations places sanctions on South Africa. Famous musicians like Stevie Wonder and U2 speak out. The world becomes united in one voice. Free Nelson Mandela. Even some people inside the South African government begin to realize they can no longer hold Mandela forever. But Mandela is smart. He does not agree to just any deal. He refuses to be released unless the government is ready to end apartheid and start real negotiations for freedom. He knows that being free without justice is not true freedom. This chapter touches something deep inside us. It shows us that a man can be in a prison cell and yet still be the freest man alive. Mandela's heart, his mind, and his spirit remained unchained. And through his patience, calm, and silent leadership, he became more powerful than the bars that held him. After 27 long years, something incredible is about to happen. In the next chapter, we will witness the moment the world had been waiting for: Nelson Mandela's release from prison, and the start of a new chapter not only in his life, but in the history of South Africa. Don't miss it. The best is yet to come. Chapter 5. Freedom and Forgiveness. Mandela becomes president. After 27 years in prison, the moment the world had waited for finally arrived. On February 11th, 1990, the gates of Victor Verster prison opened, and Nelson Mandela walked out, tall, calm, and smiling. He was 71 years old. The world held its breath, watching the man who had become a global symbol of justice and resistance. But what surprised everyone the most was his face, not filled with anger, but with peace. There were no shouts for revenge, no calls for hate. Mandela simply raised his fist and smiled. The long walk to freedom had truly begun. Mandela's release did not mean the fight was over. South Africa was still deeply divided. Violence and fear filled the streets. Apartheid laws were still in place. But instead of calling for war, Mandela called for talks. He sat down at the same table with the people who had once called him a terrorist, the very leaders who had locked him away for almost 3 decades. And what did he say? He spoke of peace, reconciliation, and building a new South Africa together. This moment in history is one of the greatest examples of true leadership. Mandela had every reason to hate. He had lost his freedom, lost time with his family, and watched his people suffer. But instead of seeking revenge, he offered forgiveness. He believed that if South Africa was to survive, it could not be built on hatred. It had to be built on understanding, truth, and healing. The negotiations were not easy. There were walkouts, violence, and fear from both sides. Many people didn't trust the process. But Mandela kept pushing forward, using his calm voice, wise words, and powerful presence to guide the country toward change. In 1991, the apartheid laws began to fall. In 1993, Mandela and then-President F.W. de Klerk shared the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to bring peace to a divided nation. Then, in April 1994, something happened that had never happened before. South Africa held its first free and fair election, where people of all races could vote. Millions stood in line for hours, some for the first time in their lives, to make their voices heard. And when the votes were counted, the result was clear. Nelson Mandela was elected the first black president of South Africa. The spike in this chapter comes here, with an image the world will never forget. Mandela, once a prisoner, now standing before a cheering crowd, taking the oath as president. But the most powerful moment wasn't the celebration. It came in his speech when he said, "We enter into a covenant that we shall build the society in which all South Africans, both black and white, will be able to walk tall without any fear in their hearts. A rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world." Instead of dividing the nation, Mandela chose to unite it. He included his former enemies in the new government. He supported the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where victims and oppressors could speak openly, face each other, and begin to heal. He even invited his prison guards and former government officials to his presidential events. Mandela believed that forgiveness was not weakness, it was power. One of the most emotional and unforgettable scenes came in 1995 during the Rugby World Cup held in South Africa. Rugby was once seen as a white man's sport, a symbol of apartheid. But Mandela wore the green and gold jersey of the South African team and walked onto the field to shake hands with the players. The mostly white crowd began to chant his name, "Nelson, Nelson," showing that change was truly possible. It was a masterful moment of unity. Mandela served only one term as president, from 1994 to 1999. He believed in giving others a chance to lead and refused to hold on to power. That decision alone set an example for leaders everywhere. He left office not as a politician, but as a peacemaker, a symbol of hope and a father of the nation. This chapter teaches us something deeply powerful. Real change comes not from anger, but from love. Not from fighting, but from forgiving. Mandela showed us that healing a nation starts with one person who dares to forgive, to listen, and to lead with heart. But even after stepping down from the presidency, Mandela's work was far from over. In the next and final chapter, we will look at how his legacy continues to touch lives around the world, and how his quiet strength still teaches us how to be better human beings. Stay with me. The story is not over yet. Chapter 6. The Legacy Lives On. Lessons from Mandela's Life. After leading South Africa through one of the most important transitions in modern history, Nelson Mandela made a decision that once again showed his true character. He stepped down after just one term as president. He could have stayed in power. Many leaders do. But Mandela believed that leadership was not about holding power. It was about serving the people. In 1999, he quietly left office, smiling as always, and handed the country over to a new generation. But even in retirement, Mandela was far from finished. In his later years, Mandela became more than just a political leader. He became a global peacemaker. He traveled the world, speaking about human rights, poverty, education, and the importance of peace. He worked to raise awareness about HIV/AIDS, especially after losing his own son to the disease. He launched the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which continues to support social justice and education. He met with presidents, kings, pop stars, and school children, always carrying the same message. We are all equal. We must all forgive. We must all work together. But perhaps the most powerful part of Mandela's story is not what he did, but what he left behind. When Nelson Mandela passed away on December 5th, 2013, the world stopped. People from every continent, every religion, and every language mourned his loss. Flags were lowered, candles were lit, and for days, the world remembered the man who had once been called a terrorist, then became a prisoner, and finally, a president, and a symbol of what is possible when courage meets kindness. The spike in this final chapter comes as we see how Mandela's spirit continues to live on. In classrooms, teachers still share his story to teach children about fairness and respect. In governments, leaders quote his words when facing difficult decisions. In communities all around the world, murals of his face appear on walls, books carry his name, and people gather on Mandela Day, July 18th, to do 67 minutes of good in honor of the 67 years Mandela spent serving his people. Even in popular culture, his influence is everywhere. From songs to films to speeches, Mandela's message of unity, forgiveness, and justice continues to inspire new generations. Why? Because his life was proof that you don't need to be powerful to make a difference. You just need to believe in what's right and never give up. Mandela once said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." And he proved it. He proved that a poor boy from a small village in South Africa could grow up to change the world. He proved that forgiveness is stronger than fear, and that patience can break even the strongest chains. His life teaches us that no matter how small you feel, no matter where you come from, you can do great things. If you have the courage to dream, the strength to act, and the heart to care. So, as we close this journey through Nelson Mandela's life, let's not just remember him. Let's learn from him. Let's speak up when we see injustice. Let's choose peace over anger. Let's forgive, even when it's hard. And above all, let's believe that even one person can change the world. Because Mandela didn't just make history. He left behind a map for all of us to follow. Thank you so much for watching. If this story inspired you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson from Mandela's life touched you the most? Every week, we share stories like this to help you learn English while learning something powerful. See you in the next video. And remember, no matter how small you feel, you have the power to do something big.